the fourth most populated city in the United States, the largest city in the state of Texas, oil and space industry center, southeast corner of the Texas Triangle, a city with a nickname that speaks for itself, Space City. You guys guessed it, we're talking about Houston. The city has evolved from a settlement of just a couple of houses to a giant industrial, scientific, and commercial center. But few people know that underground beneath Houston conceals things nearly as interesting as those above it. What lies beneath Houston? Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to see more fascinating content. Let's start our dive. At the very top, we have the surface layer made of asphalt, the one cars drive on and people walk on every day. It's often hit by heavy Texas rainstorms. In Houston, it's usually 2 to 3 inches thick. Below that is the base layer, which is 6 to 10 inches thick. It's often made of crushed limestone or sand and gravel. This layer keeps the road together. Critical highways with heavy traffic have an additional concrete layer. Next is the subgrade layer of compacted soil. It's at least 12 inches thick, depending on the type of soil. And this is just the beginning of the layer cake. We can find something more interesting right under the roads. Already, at a depth of about 25 inches, we literally trip over a dense network of household utilities. Here are residential electricity cables, telephone wires, internet lines, as well as water and gas pipes. We should note, that's pretty shallow compared to northern cities in the US, let alone Canada. Obviously, that's because it's warmer in Houston. Technically, there's a frost line, but it's so shallow, only 12 inches, that it does not essentially affect anything. In fact, almost all utilities in Houston are pretty close to the surface. Why so? Because of the soft and unstable clay soil. That means there's a higher risk of damage to utilities. Proximity to the surface means less movement and easier access for repairmen. Alright, we're going deeper. Below the dense network of utilities at depths of up to 6 feet, we see a network of storm drainage pipes. Due to frequent rainstorms and hurricanes, it's crucial to have a big storm drainage system here. At about the same level are the domestic sewer pipes that remove wastewater from homes. So almost every street here harbors a complex and important system. And if you try to dig without a permit, you'll first stumble upon a cable, then a pipe, and then a fine. That's not the worst part, though. There are scarier things beneath Houston. We go a little deeper, and at a depth of about 10 feet, we find bones. Lots of them. A terrifying amount. And this doesn't look like a typical cemetery, this is a mass grave. In 2018, the Sugarland suburb of Houston began construction of a new college. However, they backed off pretty quickly after human remains were discovered. In total, they found the bones of 95 people in the mass grave. All of them were African American, almost all of them male, and it was not difficult to find out the cause of their death. The details of the story are enough to send a chill down the spine. Sugarland owes its name to the sugarcane that was once cultivated here. Maintaining such plantations demanded a steady workforce for hard manual labor. A new form of labor exploitation emerged then. As you know, in 1865, the 13th Amendment to the US Constitution officially abolished slavery. But then, prisoners began to be forced to work on such plantations. There were many African Americans among them, convicted based on very questionable laws. A terrible irony is that Sugarland has an unofficial motto: life is sweeter here. The convicts who named the place the Hellhole of the Brazos would hardly agree. The sugarcane growing area was swampy and full of biting flies, and those who couldn't endure the exhausting labor were found in a mass grave. But Sugarland is not the only place where such graves have been discovered. There are similar ones in Tennessee and South Carolina. No one knows where the next graves will be found. The owners of the land in Houston where the remains were found, the Fort Bend Independent School District, has developed a curriculum to educate students about the history and impact of the convict leasing system. And Dexter McCoy, a Fort Bend County Commissioner, is pushing for a dedicated memorial to the African Americans who died there. If we dig a bit lower, at a depth of about 13 feet beneath Houston, we can find many more things related to the city's history. and there are no more horrifying stories here, just archaeological artifacts from times past. In 2016, the Texas Department of Transportation, TxDOT, was replacing the Elysian Street Viaduct, or simply the Elysian Street Bridge, in the Frosttown area. The viaduct was built back in the 1950s. They also dug an adjacent section to check whether the adjoining land was suitable for improving the North Houston Highway. And as the digging went on, they found remnants of Houston's first working-class neighborhood. For example, an old brick sidewalk, remaining house foundations, pet graves, bottles, inkwells, jewelry, more than 150,000 artifacts in total. These items span more than a century of history, dating from the 1830s to the 1950s. According to Jason Barrett, PhD, a participant of the excavation, it was in this area that Jonathan Benson Frost, one of Houston's earliest settlers, built a house and blacksmith shop in 1836. And then, this spot on the banks of the Buffalo Bayou River grew into a settlement where immigrants lived at first. James Butte Park now occupies the site. The artifacts found in the park are now being studied and transferred to a museum. The Texas Department of Transportation, together with the Houston Archaeological Society, conduct further research on the site. That's the state's cultural heritage, after all. We descend even lower into the bowels of Houston. At depths of up to 16 feet is an almost mystical site that has sparked an urban legend, the Donnellan family crypt. Once upon a time, in the mid-19th century, a wealthy family named Donnellan lived in Houston. The father of the family, Timothy Donnellan, made a solid fortune and wanted to have an impressive burial place for the afterlife. In 1849, he found eternal rest in the family tomb, in a prestigious place, on the banks of a Buffalo Bayou overlooking the then port of Houston. In 1867, Timothy's son died of injuries suffered when he picked up an explosive cannonball on the riverbank. Don't be surprised, 3 Confederate ships were rumored to have been sunk in the area. Ammunition was found here until 1968. A few months later, the mother of the family died. She was buried in the same vault alongside her husband and son. Time passed and the crypt stood. The city around was growing, striving upwards, and in 1903, the construction of the Franklin Street Bridge, which now connects the 2 main streets of Houston, began. And during construction, workers found the crypt. The remains were reburied, but the crypt was not demolished. Rather, it was embedded in the structure of the bridge. You might wonder, why is it considered an urban legend? Here it is, the wall of the crypt. You can see it if you take a walk down the trail along Buffalo Bayou. The thing is, this whole story is not 100% proven. For example, there's not a single photo of the crypt itself, or at least a drawing, and it's not certain that the wall seen from the walking path is part of the crypt. Perhaps the original crypt was demolished, and what we see here is a new creation. Either way, it's part of Houston's history, even if it is fiction. At the same depth of 16 feet beneath Houston, there's a light-filled tunnel called the Light Inside, and anyone can access it. You just have to buy a ticket to the Houston Museum of Fine Arts. It was created, as well as the entire concept of underground tunnels, between the museum's buildings by artists James Turrell and Carlos Cruz Diaz. Interestingly, before becoming an artist, James Turrell had successfully studied math and geology. However, he eventually started working on luminous installations. His career began in California. In 1999, he designed this underground installation, the Light Inside, which has already become legendary. It's basically a lighted corridor, but it's designed in such a way that the perspective is blurred, and soon the visitor no longer recognizes where the walls and the floor and the ceiling are. Through his installations, Turrell aims to make light a tangible presence, allowing viewers to engage with it directly. And judging by the delighted comments from the museum visitors, he has succeeded in this. We continue our journey downward. At 20 feet below the surface is an underground tunnel system. Actually, we're not alone here. Thousands of Houston residents come down here every day. How and why? Let's find out. Imagine you're an office worker. Every day you have to run errands downtown. Now, consider the average summer temperature outside is 82 degrees, and you're wearing a suit in a stone jungle. And now imagine you can hide from it all. Yes, under the ground. Moreover, in the heat of the day, you can stay indoors almost all the time. Beneath Houston, there's a system of pedestrian underground passages that connects more than 90 city blocks. It all started with the first tunnel constructed in the 1930s. It connected two buildings that belonged to former Texas Governor Ross Sterling. And then development companies started adding more and more passages to the tunnel, connecting more and more buildings. There are only two locations to enter the underground directly from the street, from Wells Fargo Plaza and McKinney Garage on Main Street. The other entrances can be found near street steps, escalators, and elevators in buildings connected to the tunnel system. This system can now be aptly described as an underground city. The tunnels are bright, clean, and air-conditioned. Here you can eat, visit a beauty salon, drop off your clothes at the dry cleaners, and go to the bank. And all this without going to the surface. Things would be fine, but there are still a couple of problems. The tunnels lack ramps and accessibility for wheelchair users. After a lot of complaints, the owners are trying to fix the situation, but it's still far from ideal. And secondly, the tunnels can protect from heat and regular rain, but in case of floods, waters overflow not only the tunnels themselves, but also the basements of the buildings to which they are connected. After Tropical Storm Allison, some buildings even began to install special floodgates, but even they do not provide a 100% guarantee that the next storm will not be worse. What is that? A siren? Back in the 1950s and 1960s, if the civil defense siren went off, the people of Houston had plenty of places to shelter. The threat of nuclear war was very real back then, so shelters were constructed all over the city at a depth of about 20 feet to protect people in the event of an attack. They were built into nearly every major and significant structure, from the Franklin Street high-rises and City Hall to Houston's First Baptist Church, Foley's department store, and many others. The shelters, of course, were equipped with everything necessary for survival. Each was stocked with a supply of food and water. The locations of the shelters were marked with special signs. Public concern and fear reached such a level in the 1960s that a list of shelters was published annually in the Houston Post, ensuring that it was available in every household. Half a century passed. Nearly all of Houston's shelters are now either no longer in a state of constant readiness or have been decommissioned entirely. Current guidelines advise seeking shelter in interior rooms in permanent buildings below ground level. And now we delve deeper to a place where a unique ancient mega cistern lies 23 feet beneath Houston. There's room for riddle and a bit of mystery here too. In 1926, Houston created a special underground reservoir. Try to imagine an 87,500 square foot concrete cistern. That's almost like 1.5 soccer fields. The ceiling of the cistern was supported by 221 columns, each 24.6 feet high. The purpose of this grandeur was to store drinking water and support the city's water supply. And it served well into 2007. But then the inevitable happened. A cistern broke, and after a leak, the reservoir was decommissioned. So is that the end of the story? Not quite. In 2010, the construction of a green space, Buffalo Bayou Park, began. The question was, what should happen to the cistern? And the Buffalo Bayou Partnership made the momentous decision to keep the cistern. And not just keep it, but turn it into a public space. Consequently, by 2016, the cistern was fitted with a 30-foot-long entrance. A walkway was created around the perimeter of the space, and it was open to the public. So what awaits the fortunate guests inside? A mysterious semi-darkness filled with rustles and splashes. There's something left of the 15 million gallons of water that were stored in the cistern. The water creates a unique optical illusion. Remember the 221 columns? Reflected in the water, they seem to hover in the air, creating the illusion of infinite space. Plus, the 17-second echo that rolls under the vaults of this man-made cave. In short, this is a place that's definitely worth visiting. Now we're going to move much lower. At a depth from 80 feet down, we find the largest parts of Houston's sewer system. These are the trunk lines that carry sewage from all over the city. These are typically 48 to 60-inch diameter pipes. This is the main flow of wastewater, which then goes either to pressure systems or leads to lift stations and treatment plants. The deepest sewer is the North Side Sewer Relief. Overall, the scale of Houston's sewer system is impressive. About 6,000 miles of sewer pipes. That's roughly the distance from Houston to Argentina and back. About 3,000 miles comprise those major collector lines, with the rest being branch lines from homes and streets. Houston is served by a total of 39 wastewater treatment plants. The largest are Sims Bayou North, 69th Street, and the Southwest WWTP. Approximately 275 million gallons of wastewater per day pass through the entire system. That's about the size of 415 Olympic swimming pools. During the rainy season, that number can double. Wait, only double? With rains like that? There's a catch. The thing is, in Houston, the storm sewer and the domestic sewer are separated, so rainwater mostly flows along its own dedicated route. But still, rainwater seeps into the sewer system. This is called infiltration. However, sewage sometimes also gets into the storm sewer, but for a much more prosaic reason: because of illegal connections. Okay, let's move further down. Is there an even deeper spot? What could be deeper in the city than the sewer system? Well, in Houston, there could be various things. For example, below the deepest sewer, there are cars racing at breakneck speeds. To see it for yourself, let's go down another 23 feet. Here, at a depth of 103 feet below the ground, is the bottom of a giant concrete pipe, a real car tunnel. Although it's actually not underground, it's underwater. This is the Washburn Tunnel. It runs under the shipping channel and connects Galena Park with Pasadena. It was built in 1950, and even then it was a tremendously pricey project, but it was worth it. The two-lane road runs north-south under the Houston Channel and is named in honor of Harry Washburn, the auditor of Harris County, Texas. The tunnel holds a bunch of records. It's the only active underwater motor vehicle tunnel in Texas. There was also the Baytown Tunnel, but it was converted to a bridge in 1995. Also, the Washburn Tunnel is the largest and first toll-free tunnel in the southern United States. It has an impressive design. All the essential systems are thoroughly detailed. Excess water is diverted back into the ship channel by pumps. Special fans remove carbon monoxide from the air. And in case of a power outage, emergency lighting is backed up by a dedicated generator. In 2008, the tunnel was added to the National Register of Historic Places. And in an ironic twist of history, Hurricane Ike hit the very same year. And for the first time ever, the tunnel was flooded. The damage was cleaned up, lessons were learned, and the tunnel remains open to this day. And just like before, it's still free to use. So have we finally made it to the very bottom? Or is there something else beneath Houston? Not yet, but there will be. Well, that would be very good news for the citizens. What are we talking about? Storm drains, as we've already mentioned, are a very useful thing. But after the devastating flooding during Hurricane Harvey in 2017, it became obvious that such a big issue requires a big solution. And such a solution was found. The Harris County Flood Control District, which has its headquarters in Houston, is considering a project for special deep underground tunnels. Yes, as deep as 150 feet underground. The plan is to construct a network of 8 large-diameter tunnels that would convey stormwater. Given that the soil beneath Houston is clay-rich and soft, this kind of construction is entirely possible. Sure, it also poses a risk of ground deformation, but different solutions are being explored. For now though, the project remains in the discussion stage. So what's holding it back? For starters, the massive cost. We're talking up to $30 billion.